Don't start the engine, sir. The voice was small enough to be mistaken, for the sound dock lines make when the tide pulls against them. That quiet, whispering tension of rope against cleat that Clifton Howard had learned to hear over 6 years of mornings near water. He had his hand on the brass rail of the boarding ladder. The boat was right there. Elaine's Run, a 32-foot cruiser with a white hull and a green stripe along the waterline, rocking gently in her slip at Cole Harbor on a gray Saturday in October. The mountains were just beginning to show through the marine layer to the north. Clifton had been looking at them. He turned. She was standing at the edge of the dock, maybe 10 feet away, in the narrow gap between two mooring posts where a person could tuck themselves out of sight if they needed to. She had needed to, apparently, for longer than he cared to think about. She was 9 years old, possibly 10, with dark braided hair coming loose at one side, and a windbreaker the color of old grass, unzipped despite the cold. Her boots were men's hiking boots, far too large, with the laces tied in double knots over the collar to keep them from sliding off. She had a backpack over one shoulder with a broken zipper held shut by a binder clip. Her arm was raised, palm flat, fingers together, the way a school crossing guard holds up a hand before they have the orange flag to do it for them. Clifton Howard was 64 years old. He had built a real estate development company from a single land parcel in Burnaby 40 years ago into a portfolio that managed $340 million in commercial and residential holdings across British Columbia and Alberta. He had been told by people who wished him well and by people who did not that he was not a man who surprised easily. He was surprised now. "I'm sorry," he said. "Don't start the engine." She swallowed. Her chin came up slightly, the way a child's chin comes up when they have made a decision and are determined not to unmake it. The boat. Someone did something to it. 2 nights ago, Thursday night, I was sleeping under the dock and I heard him and I climbed up to see. Clifton did not move his hand from the boarding rail. He was aware of it with the same sudden exactness with which you become aware of a door handle, the moment someone tells you what's on the other side. "What did you see?" he said. "He had a headlamp, one of those ones that go on your head. He was here for a long time. He had a bag. He went into the engine compartment through the back. Maybe 40 minutes. Then he came out and he did something near the base of the hull with a small tool I couldn't see properly. Then he made a phone call." She paused. "I remember what he said. I've been saying it to myself every night so I wouldn't forget it." The marina around them was quiet. It was not quite 7 in the morning. A cormorant sat on a piling 30 feet out and watched the water with the fixed attention of something that expected the water to answer. "Tell me," Clifton said. She took a breath. The kind of careful breath a child takes when they are about to recite something they've been carrying in their chest for 2 days, afraid of what happens if they drop it. He said, "It's done. He takes the boat out every Saturday at 8. The fuel line will start leaking after about 20 minutes at cruising speed. The steering cable on the port side is cut through. Not all the way. Enough." Then he listened for a while. Then he said, "He won't make it to the inlet. By the time he smells the fuel, the engine heat will have done it. There's nothing out there but open water." Then he listened again, and then he said, "Yes, Mr. G, that's what we agreed. The partnership reverts to you automatically. I've read the clause 3 times. It's clean." Clifton Howard took his hand off the boarding rail. He took it off slowly, deliberately, and stepped back 1 step on the dock boards, and then 1 more. His shoes made a hollow sound against the treated wood. The cormorant on the piling turned its head, as if it had heard something shift. "Mr. G," he said quietly. That's what he called him, Mr. G. Clifton looked at the boat. Elaine's Run. He had named her 4 years ago, the spring after his wife died, because Elaine had loved this stretch of water, the way some people love a language they did not grow up speaking, but have learned so thoroughly it lives in their bones. She had learned to read tide charts the year they were married. She had kept a logbook of every trip they'd taken up Indian Arm, every anchorage, every weather window. The logbook was still in the cabin. He had come to the marina at 7 every Saturday since losing her, because the water was where he still knew how to be in the world without her. He pulled out his phone. He did not call Garrett. He did not call his operations manager. He called the Coast Guard Marine Emergency Line, and then the non-emergency line for the Vancouver Police Department, and then he stood on the dock in the October morning and waited. "What's your name?" he asked. "Anola." "Anola. Last name?" "Anola Sinclair." "How old are you?" 9. I'll be 10 in February." "How long have you been sleeping under the dock?" She looked at the water instead of at him. "Since July." He didn't say anything to that. He looked at her backpack with the binder clip and at the windbreaker that was not warm enough for October in Vancouver, and at the boots that belonged to someone else's feet. And he did not say anything because there was nothing to say that would be adequate. And he had learned a long time ago that the difference between a man who says the inadequate thing and a man who says nothing is that the second man is sometimes worth sitting beside. "How many Saturdays have you come?" he asked instead. "This is the fourth." "You came 4 weeks in a row?" "Yes. The first 3 times I didn't see anyone I could tell. There were other people on the dock, but not the right person. I didn't know whose boat it was until I looked at the name." She looked at him carefully. "Elaine's Run, that's a person's name, Elaine." "It is." "Someone you knew." "My wife, she died 4 years ago." Enola was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My mom died in January. She was sick for almost 2 years." Clifton sat down on the dock cleat beside him. It was not a graceful movement. His knees were not what they had been, but he sat down anyway so that he was closer to her eye level, and he folded his hands on his knees, and he looked at her. "I'm sorry about your mother," he said. "She was a good person." Enola said it the way a child says a thing they have said many times, not to convince anyone, but to keep the fact alive. "She would have wanted me to tell you. She always said if you see something wrong and you don't say anything, you become part of it." She was right. I know, a small pause, she usually was. The Marine unit arrived first, 2 officers in a rigid inflatable who tied off at the end of the slip and approached with the careful, unhurried competence of people who have been called to waterfront situations many times. Petty Officer Annika Sorensen asked Clifton to confirm the boat registration, then asked Enola to show them where she had seen the man enter the engine compartment. Enola showed her, precisely. She walked them to the stern and pointed to the stowage hatch and described the man's height and the color of his jacket and the brand of his headlamp, which she had recognized because her grandfather had owned the same model. She gave the information in the same deliberate, careful way she had given it to Clifton. Without embellishment, without drama, with the patient exactness of someone who has been rehearsing testimony for 11 days. Petty Officer Sorensen's looked at Clifton over the girl's head. Her expression did not change. That, in itself, told him something. The Marine technician who joined them 20 minutes later confirmed it in 11 minutes flat. Confirmed, and then some. The fuel line at the secondary junction had been modified, not cut but partially thinned, a professional job designed to hold under low-speed idle and fail progressively under load. The port steering cable had been cut 60% through at a point inside the housing where visual inspection from above would not reveal it. There was also a device near the fuel tank that had been introduced through the engine hatch. The technician stepped back from the stern and said very quietly that he would need to call a specialist and that Clifton should stay off the boat. Inspector Louise Brandt from Major Crimes arrived at 8:40. She was a compact woman in her mid-50s with short red hair and glasses. She kept pushing up the bridge of her nose with one finger while she wrote, which she did constantly and without looking down. She wore a charcoal jacket over dark jeans and a lanyard with her badge clipped at mid-chest. She had the focused quiet of someone who has been doing this long enough that urgency no longer shows on her face, but has not been doing it so long that urgency has left her altogether. She sat with Enola on the dock bench near the gangway, not across from her, beside her. "Enola," she said before she opened her notebook, "I want you to know 2 things. First, you are not in any trouble. Not for being here, not for sleeping on the dock, not for any of it. Second, you've already done the most important part. You told Mr. Hallward, and he believed you, and that matters more than anything you tell me. But it will help us find the man who did this and the man who paid him. It's your choice." Enola looked at her for a moment. "I'll tell you, I've been saying it to myself every night for 11 days so I wouldn't forget. I don't want to keep carrying it anymore." "Then let's put it somewhere safer than your memory," Inspector Brandt said, and opened her notebook. While Enola spoke, Clifton stood at the far end of the dock, with his hands in the pockets of his coat, and looked at the mountains and thought about Garrett Holt. 22 years. Garrett had been the first person to believe in the Burnaby project when no bank would touch it. Garrett had flown to Calgary with him when the Alberta portfolio was collapsing and had stayed 2 weeks in a budget hotel on McLeod Trail until they had turned it around. Garrett had stood at the front of the chapel at Elaine's funeral and spoken for 8 minutes about the woman who used to call him on his birthday every year. Without fail, even when she was sick, even when she had more reason than most people to forget other people's birthdays. Clifton had signed the amended partnership agreement in September. Garrett had brought it to the office in a thin folder with 3 flagged pages and a pen. He had said it was a tax efficiency structure, something their accountants had recommended, something minor. Clifton had been late for a flight to Edmonton. He had signed. He had not read it. He had not read it because in 22 years, he had never needed to read what Garrett put in front of him. Inspector Brandt came to stand beside him after a while. "Mr. Hallward," she said, "before I ask you the harder questions, I need you to think about something. Is there anyone in your professional life who would benefit significantly from your death? I'm not asking you to make an accusation. I'm asking you to think." "I've been thinking," Clifton said, "since the moment she said Mr. G." He told her about Garrett Holt. He told her about the amended agreement and September and the folder and the pen and the flight to Edmonton. He told her about the dinner 3 weeks ago at a restaurant on Robson Street where Garrett had asked carefully and indirectly whether Clifton had ever thought about stepping back from day-to-day operations, whether the portfolio might be better structured under a single managing partner, whether Clifton had given any thought to his own health. He had been 63. He jogged 3 mornings a week and had better blood work than men 15 years younger. He told her about the way Garrett had refilled his wine glass twice without being asked. Inspector Brandt wrote. She pushed her glasses up. She wrote more. "In the past 20 months, she said then, 2 of Garrett Holt's professional acquaintances have died in circumstances ruled accidental. A man named Douglas Perot, 61, drowned in a boating incident on Okanagan Lake last May. A man named Roderick Slaney, 58, fell from a balcony at a rental property in Whistler last December. Both had signed amended partnership agreements in the months before they died. In both cases, the amendments significantly expanded Garrett Holt's controlling interest." She looked at him over her glasses. "Both cases are currently open." Clifton did not speak for a long moment. The mountains were clearer now. The marine layer had burned off. It was going to be a beautiful day on the water. "How much?" he asked. "Based on the partnership structure you've described, approximately $340 million in holdings would have come under Garrett Holt's sole discretionary control." Clifton nodded once. He looked at the name along the hull of his boat. Elaine's Run. She had said once, on an anchorage up Jervis Inlet with the stars so thick they looked like something spilled, that the world seemed bigger and smaller at the same time on the water. Bigger because you could see so far. Smaller because you remembered you were just a person in a boat. He had not brought anyone with him on these Saturday trips. He had told himself it was because he liked the solitude. He understood now that the solitude had been planned for. He turned back to the inspector. "The girl," he said. "Yes. She's been sleeping under this dock since July. She's 9 years old. She has no parents, and I don't know yet what the other arrangements look like, but I intend to find out. I'm not sending her back to a dock. Any arrangement tonight should go through the child protection process, both to protect her and to protect you. It doesn't have to be slow. It can move quickly when an adult has means and a child has no legal guardian with standing to object." "Is there a legal guardian?" "We'll find out. Tonight there's an emergency placement option. A licensed foster home 2 kilometers from here that one of our social workers uses for exactly this kind of evening. It's not a group home. It's a family. If you want to stay involved from tomorrow morning, that's a conversation to facilitate." "I want to be involved from tomorrow morning." Inspector Brandt looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "All right, let me make some calls." Before she did, she went back to Enola and asked her one question. She asked if there was anyone who would worry when Enola didn't come back that evening. Enola thought about it. She pulled at the cuff of her windbreaker with 2 fingers. "Odessa," she said finally. "Odessa Yip. She runs the bakery at the end of the dock. She gives me a croissant every morning. She never asked me to leave." Inspector Brandt wrote down the name and underlined it. The bakery was a small, glassed-in counter at the landward end of the marina, a converted shipping container with a proper espresso machine and a display case that smelled the way display cases should smell when someone has been baking since 4 in the morning. Odessa Yip was a woman of about 60, with silver hair cropped short and flour on her left forearm, and the kind of calm that comes not from nothing ever going wrong, but from having decided what to do when it does. She looked up when the 3 of them came through the door. She looked at Enola first. "Hey, little one," she said. "You all right?" "I'm okay," Enola said. "I did it, I told him." Odessa looked at Clifton, then at the inspector's badge, then back at Clifton, at the charcoal coat and the silver hair and the expression of a man who has recently been shown the gap between the life he thought he was living and the life that was actually happening. She went around the counter. She crouched in front of Enola and said, Are you hungry? A little. Sit down. She gestured at the small table by the window. Sit down right now. She was back in 4 minutes with a bowl of soup, real soup, not tinned, the kind with the dark surface and the smell that fills a room, and a croissant and a mug of hot chocolate. She set it in front of Enola without ceremony and said, "Eat all of it," and Enola ate. She ate the way a child eats who has not had a hot meal in longer than a 9-year-old should ever have to know. While she ate, Odessa stood near the door with Clifton. She kept her voice low. "I've known about her since August," she said. "She never asked me for anything. I had to almost trick her into the first croissant, told her it was going stale. She is the most self-contained child I have ever met." She looked at Enola at the window. Her mother did something right. Whatever she had, she gave it to that girl. "What do you know about the mother?" "Nurse. Worked at Vancouver General. Sick for a long time. Enola took care of her near the end. 9 years old, and she was keeping the apartment clean and heating up soup and making sure the right people knew when things were bad." Odessa was quiet for a moment. There was a sister. Didn't work out. Clifton looked at the girl at the table, at the way she held the soup spoon, careful and deliberate, like someone who had learned not to take up too much space at a table that didn't belong to her. "It's going to work out now," he said quietly. Odessa looked at him. That's a big thing to say. "I know." She studied him the way people study a statement they're not sure whether to believe. Then she said, "She came back 4 Saturdays. She could have stayed under that dock and not been anyone's problem. She came back because she thought you should know." Odessa paused. "A person who does that deserves to have someone say a big thing and mean it." "I mean it," Clifton said. Odessa looked at him for one more moment. Then she went back behind the counter, and she did not say anything else, and she did not have to. Garrett Holt was arrested the following morning at 6:55 as he came down the front steps of his house in West Vancouver in a pressed overcoat with a travel mug in his hand. He did not run. He said nothing except to ask for his lawyer, which he did before the officer reading. The caution had finished the second sentence. The hired man, a former Marine surveyor named Bram Aldis, who had done 3 similar jobs in the previous 2 years, was found at a motel in South Surrey at approximately the same time. He began cooperating within the hour. He named both previous victims of Garrett's network, confirmed the circumstances of both deaths, and gave a third name that the Combined Forces Special Enforcement Unit had been quietly looking for in connection with a financial crimes investigation open since 2024. Inspector Brandt called Clifton at 7:22. "It's done," she said. "Was he surprised?" Clifton asked. She paused for a moment before answering. "He looked surprised that we knew, not surprised that it came." Clifton stood at the window of the foster home where Enola had spent the night, a yellow house on a quiet street in Kitsilano, with a vegetable garden, going to frost in the front yard, and a woman named Meg Forthright, who had been a foster carer for 15 years, and who had met them at the door the previous evening with food already on the table and no questions that couldn't wait until morning. He stood at the window and listened to Inspector Brandt's voice in his ear and watched the frost thin on the garden and thought about Elaine. About the logbook in the cabin of the boat, about the way she had written the name of every anchorage in blue ink in her careful, slanted handwriting. About the morning he had named the boat and how he had stood at the marina and said the name out loud to no one and felt the absence of her so completely that it had been almost a presence in itself. He heard footsteps on the stairs. Enola appeared in the kitchen doorway in borrowed pajamas, blue ones, slightly too large, her hair loose and freshly washed. She was carrying a stuffed bear that had belonged to Meg Forthright's grandchildren and had sat on the dresser of the spare room for 3 years waiting for someone who needed it. She looked at Clifton at the window. "Is it done?" she asked. "Yes, he was arrested this morning." She nodded. The same grave, deliberate nod she gave to every piece of important information, as if filing it somewhere reliable inside herself. "Good," she said. She came to stand beside him at the window. She was very small beside the glass. The frost was thinning in the early light. "Mr. Hallward," she said. "You can call me Clifton." She considered this. "Mr. Hallward," she said, again more gently. "My mom used to say that most people look at the water but they don't see it. She said the water is always showing you something if you're still enough to look. She said the people who learn to be still are the ones who notice things other people walk past." Clifton was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful with itself. "Your mother sounds like she was a remarkable woman." She was. She said if you see something and you stay quiet, the quiet becomes part of the problem. She made me promise. Enola looked up at him. I almost didn't come back the fourth Saturday. I was cold, and I thought maybe I had the wrong boat, but she made me promise. You kept it. I tried. He put his hand slowly and gently on her small shoulder. She didn't move away. After a moment, she leaned her cheek very slightly against his arm, just the way a child leans against something she has decided is solid. A week later, on a Saturday morning with no fog and the mountains standing clean and sharp above the inlet, Clifton took Elaine's run out for the first time since the forensic team had cleared her. He had had the fuel line replaced and the steering cable replaced, and everything the technician had touched gone over twice by a second technician, and he knew the boat was sound, but his hand still held the key for one long moment before he turned it. Enola was standing at the bow. She had asked to come. She was wearing a life jacket over a red fleece that was hers now, properly hers, bought 3 days ago at a shop on West 4th Avenue, where she had stood in the aisle for 4 minutes looking at the rack before choosing the red without explanation. She had one hand on the bow rail, and she was looking north up the inlet at the place where the water narrowed between the mountains and went still and dark green. "It's beautiful," she said. "Yes," Clifton said. He eased the throttle forward. The engine found its rhythm. Elaine's run moved out of the slip and into open water, steady and unhurried, the bow cutting a small white line in the flat surface of the inlet. Enola turned her face into the wind. She did not say anything else for a long time. She didn't need to. They were both still enough to see what the water was showing them. The old man at the helm learning, for the first time in 4 years, how to bring someone with him. And the girl at the bow keeping a promise made to a woman who had understood, long before either of them ever needed it, that paying attention is not a small thing. It is, in fact, the only thing that has ever held anything together.